Star Companion. What's it the podcast of, David?
It is the Star Trek podcast. Unofficial
What?
at this point, but you know, we're shooting for that official spot.
That's right. You're goddamn right. I actually fear, if I may be so bold,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go where some other men have gone before. Allegedly, CBS wants to expand its digital horizons,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd be fools to start shutting down podcasts, but we'll fucking see.
Are they planning on doing that?
Well, they have their own podcast already, but I don't know. I'm just a worrywart.
I imagine it's an extended commercial for whatever they're putting out these days.
Mm-hmm.
And here on the Star Companion, we tell it like it is. We don't kowtow to any corporate interests. And my name's David.
And I'm Zach.
And today we're reviewing Star Trek Enterprise, Season 1, Episode 13. The name of the episode is Dear Doctor.
Yes, star date between 0909 21.5.1 and 1109 21.5.1. And for those of you who have been paying attention, you may notice I'm captain on break. I'm off duty. I'm not wearing my jacket.
He's captain in the mess hall.
Yeah, I thought he was it Dear Doctor? It was Dear Doctor. I thought Dad was drinking a whiskey. Of course, it was just iced tea.
Of course, yeah.
And then I
He
was
needs
like,
something wholesome to quench his thirst.
Sometimes I see Dad and I'm like, they really did write this shit for him.
Yeah,
He just standing there.
he fits the role so perfectly.
Yeah. So if I remember right, this is your favorite episode of this young season?
Yes, it is actually. This is classic Star Trek to me. This is what makes Star Trek amazing, is that they go into these gray areas, and it's something that I feel like often Star Wars, being the other, of course, sci-fi comparison, can't pull off because it's kind of a good versus evil dynamic, and especially as we progress more through the Star Trek timeline canon, we're eventually going to get to DS9 and Voyager and things like that, and I really enjoy when this show gets into the gray areas like that because it's very thought-provoking.
Oh man, dude, you are gonna fucking love DS9.
Yeah.
So I was explaining to Wade of Stay Cool Forever fame, that Deep Space Nine is the most brilliant fucking microcosm or story I think told in the Star Trek sort of canon.
Yeah.
It takes on religion. It takes on fascism. There's a direct comparison between the Third Reich and Nazi Germany and Jews and what it means to be spiritual, and then it has the first iteration of Section 31, which is a unofficial sect of Star Trek, like rogue CIA operatives who work between the lines.
Interesting.
And sometimes you have to make decisions that are for the greater good. The captain is Benjamin Sisko, who I think the first episode is the emissary, and he is a prophet that's foretold in prophecy.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give too much away, but at a certain point there's an apotheosis story arc, which is holy shit.
Right on.
In fucking Star Trek, they ascend to an astral godlike plane. It's just nuts. But anyway, Star Trek, in comparison to Star Wars, is afforded the ability to tell something in a moral gray area, in a framework that's hard to define, and make difficult decisions, and then try to base a philosophy on that decision.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, in this episode, it's basically about it's about a couple of things. So the first thing is it's structured as kind of a back and forth dialogue between Dr. Phlox and his colleague. His name is Dr. Lucas, who's stationed on Denobula, and so they kind of write each other back and forth and share their experiences. And
I think it's important to note that it was like a doctor exchange program with Denobula, and his friend Dr. Lucas is a human.
Yeah, it's part of the interspecies medical exchange.
There you go.
Which is the first time that's mentioned, and possibly the only time it's ever mentioned. But it is said that Dr. Lucas is, like, if not the only human, then one of the only humans on Denobula working with the Denobulans. So, and we can pretty much assume that Phlox is probably the only Denobulan working with humans as well. So they're kind of like counterparts in a way. They mirror each other.
Have you ever? I had never heard of Denobulans prior to our Enterprise.
No, I had not. Yeah.
So I wonder, like, because at a certain point, the Federation becomes pretty fucking vast. And so, he's clearly our, resident alien with bumps on his head.
Yeah, that's funny. Our resident cutie pie. The other part of this episode is they basically. They end up on this planet. Is it Valakia or is it Valaka? I think it's
Valakia.
Valakia.
I know the people are the Valakians.
Yeah, the Valakians. And, through a series of events, they end up on Valakia, and the Valakians are suffering from a genetic disease. And it's killing them off slowly. And so, Phlox is tasked with finding the cure for this disease, which he does find, but then he ends up, confessing that as a scientist, he doesn't know if it's his place to cure the disease. And that's where we get into the third part of this episode, or the third, I guess, like, overarching theme of this episode, which is that there's actually a second humanoid species on Valakia, and they're called the Mank, and they're kind of seen as probably, I would say, kind of like Neanderthals, like if Neanderthals would have survived and kind of co-evolved with human beings. They're kind of... Go ahead.
I think that's the comparison that Phlox makes to Dad.
Yeah.
Like a Homo sapien versus Neanderthal. And so I think where you're going was that the Mink are kind of a subclass of citizen. And Phlox finds out that they're making evolutionary leaps and will eventually be a rather smart, capable species on the planet.
Yeah. And they're actually he discovers that they're capable of pretty high cognitive abilities, and they can empathize. They're just generally good-natured people, but for whatever reason, the Mank have been segregated away from the Valakians, and they kind of live on the outskirts of their society and live in the dumps and kind of the swamps and I guess maybe like the equivalent of maybe like New Orleans.
Like some sort of alien bayou.
Yeah, beneath the sea level. Yeah, low rent.
Nice. That was a Katrina reference, and
yes.
So the Valakians they're because of that's a genetic issue that's going on, and within a couple centuries, they're definitely gonna be completely killed by their disease. Yeah. Which would then give rise to the Mink, and they'll be able to become a prospering society on top of it. And so Dad is then plagued with the issue of, if we save the Valakians, you doom the Mink forever. But if you don't save the Valakians, then probably eventually the Mink will not subvert, but rise to a higher cognitive plane.
they'll be naturally selected, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, Phlox is able to come up with the cure, but he's hesitant to give it to him, and Archer kind of pushes him at first. He's like, we should give it to these people, like it's inhumane, it's this, that, and the other. But Phlox is like, I have a duty as a scientist, you know. If I help these people, I go against my principles as a scientist, which is, you know, I believe in evolution, I believe in natural selection, and that's exactly what's happening here. And even though this, you know, even though this the society of the Vlakians is pretty advanced, you know, it still falls within the scope of evolutionary theory and you know, natural selection.
Mm-hmm. And so Dad's plagued with the choice of prime directive and clearly alludes to
Yes.
some sort of directive that could eventually be written.
He basically invents it himself.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. You know, I really like they do a good job of setting up the subclass, master class society, like differences in the society. You know, he goes, he doesn't speak the same language as you? Nah, he's a Mank. You know, and it's like, and so one of my notes I wrote here was, screw you, you dirty Third Reich Falekians, master race having bastards. And I was triggered at a certain point in this one. But I think it should be noted that Dad's compassion knows no bounds.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something he has to wrestle with. And I think this is an episode that really renders, you know, compassion useless in comparison to the greater good.
Absolutely.
You know, or rather natural good.
Yeah, and it shows that, you know, that the farther the humans go out in space and the more that we explore and the more that we do, we need to temper our compassion and temper, you know, and know when to temper our compassion and maybe know when to temper, you know, interfering with other societies and other cultures, you know. And something that they mention later on, or maybe not mentioned, but it's alluded to, but the humans, I mean, the people aboard the Enterprise, they're pretty much agreeing to not repeat what the Vulcans did on Earth. You know, the Vulcans pretty much made their decisions for the humans and played God for them. And so, you know, here it is, we're confronted with the same dilemma, and it's like, what do we do here? Do we learn from the mistakes of the past? Do we try to do the same thing? What I like especially about the Mank too is, you know, the Mank are treated kind of as a subclass, but they're not like, it's not overt, you know, it's not like they're like enslaved and like living on plantations and like, you know, Archer's like doing barrel rolls through like cotton fields trying to, you know, save the slaves. It's like, it's just like, yeah, they kind of live on the outskirts of society, and, you know, we've integrated a few of them in, and, you know, they're just there, you know, so it's like, you want to fight for the, you know, your natural tendency is to fight for the Mank, but then you're just like, well, what about the Valakians? Like, they're not necessarily doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
You know, they're trying to save their species, but there are the Mank, and it's like, so you're just like, for me, I was like sent back and forth between the two races for the whole episode.
Yeah, it's a real, it really is a pretty major quandary of ethical implications, you know? And I think it's pretty indicative of Dad's character when he says that my compassion guides my judgment, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a wholly reasonable sentiment and feeling. And so you really are undoubtedly cast between both options.
Yeah.
You know, and then so at the end, Phlox does his job and serves his duty to the captain and lets the captain decide what is right, and thankfully, you know, much to Archer's chagrin and Phlox's joy, he makes the proper choice about staying out of the, you know, evolutionary quandary.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of something that T'Pol has touched on, in previous episodes. Is like, hey, like we should be a little bit more careful, when we go down to, and investigate these societies. Like I think it was maybe like 1 or 2 episodes ago, the one where they find the shapeshifter on the pre-industrial society world, and he's like poisoning them.
Was he a shapeshifter?
Yeah, he's like a shape. I have the notes right here. He actually has a race.
Because if he was a shapeshifter, that would be crazy. That means he would be somehow related to the founders on DS9.
Yeah. What is he? I have it here. He's a Malurian.
Oh, okay.
And the other place that the Malurians show up is in the original series, if I remember correctly. But I remember in that episode, T'Pol was like, "Hey, we should maybe scope this planet out a little bit before we just go jumping down there." And so,
is this the one where Dad wants to fuck the girl?
Yes.
Okay.
The alchemist.
That's right.
But they go down there, they get in this huge phaser fight, and now the civilization knows that there's aliens out there. But it's like this one is like, this really drives home that point that like, hey, maybe we should like temper our curiosity a little bit before we go rolling into these places and deciding things for people. It's not exactly, we have good intentions, but the outcome may not be exactly what we desire.
Yeah, that, and maybe we should build an outpost and observe them, and then all of a sudden Data's head's gonna show up disembodied.
Yeah.
As he goes rogue. I think my biggest qualm with this episode is Dad's gotta stop giving cheese to that fucking dog, man.
He really does. Yeah, that's right. That was a part of this episode where Phlox
plays the vet.
Yeah, and he brings everybody in and he's checking out people's problems.
It's like, damn, man. Not only is that dog gonna get fat,
Porthos,
bro.
Man.
Sure. And it's so stupid that whatever. Yeah. No, I get it.
And I love how T'Pol has cavities.
Oh, in the next episode?
No. In this episode,
is
she
that in
visits
this one?
T'Pol.
Okay, he plays dentist then too. Oh,
yeah,
that's right, because he's asking about Crewman Cutler. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Shit.
He's like, you have cavities, and it's like, here's T'Pol. She's like eating chocolate and like living like a human.
Right, eating candy. She just can't get enough of that Reese's. So, David, I know you're a fan of continuity. I've got some continuity notes here. This episode foreshadows more directly the concept of the Prime Directive, as we know, expanding upon brief mentions from Civilization, that episode you also referenced. Mm-hmm. Dr. Jeremy Lucas is later seen in the flesh in Season 4, episode Cold Station 12 and the Augments.
Oh.
So we get to meet this guy later, which is fun. This episode contains the second mention of, and the first appearance of the movie night. And it's the 1943 version of For Whom the Bell Tolls, which I imagine was easy to clear, and I bet CBS owned. And this episode follows a similar narrative structure to TNG's episode Data's Day, in which a character provides narration in the form of correspondence to a colleague, and it also bears resemblance to DS9's In the Pale Moonlight. However, that episode features a personal log being recorded instead of a letter. In the Pale Moonlight has... if I remember right, In the Pale Moonlight is the one where Cisco gives the Romulan the data core, and he goes, "It's a fake!"
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's the one. So, that's pretty fun. Fun fact, apparently Phlox is... initially, they were going to have someone narrate Dr. Lucas's part. Mm-hmm. But they had Phlox read it instead.
Interesting.
And then the episode originally ended with Phlox disobeying Archer's orders, um, because of the crisis of conscience, and the Doctor essentially does something that violates the hierarchical obligation of him to his captain, and they opted to not do that. So
Yeah.
it's pretty. It was a great episode, in my opinion. I particularly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and it shows that you don't need an episode full of action and adventure and gallivanting
Yeah.
to really bring home a great narrative. And the thing that I like the most about this episode is, most of the episode when Phlox is talking to Lucas, he expresses his admiration of the emotional depth and the abilities of humans to care. But, in their time of need, he's the one that brings out the spirit of science, and that's important, especially when you're faced with hardship,
Yeah, and I think this episode really is classic Trek. It focuses on science. It focuses on a moral dilemma, a crisis of conscience, something that you can learn from and really consider and put into a lens of other historical iterations that you're focusing on now.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
The only thing this episode was missing was Jeffrey Combs. Fuck.
He'll be back in a few episodes, I promise.
Oh, I hope so. Have we reached a point where you haven't seen yet?
No, I'm about probably 4 episodes out, I think.
Oh, wow. So you almost made it to the end of season 1 the first time through.
Yeah, I'm a pretty slow watcher.
Excellent. All right. Well, do you have anything further to add?
Just one last thing. The director of the episode, what was his name or her name? It was James Contner, and I thought this was interesting. He directed a lot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer episodes, and so that kind of feeds into the whole. When you were first watching this show and telling me about it, you liked the whole kind of monster of the week dynamic.
Yeah.
That it really isn't present this episode, but I mean, I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all right. As you know, I'm Zach.
And I'm David.
That's David. And this has been the Star Companion. You can catch us on major podcasting platforms. We're on YouTube now.
That's right.
And,
we are live.
Shoot us an email at thestarcompanion@gmail.com, and thanks for listening. Take care of yourself.
Yeah.